Hello everyone! Today we are going to analyze a game. This is a Queen's Gambit declined game. Okay, and it goes like d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, a6. So this is the Janowski variation. C takes d5, e takes d5, knight f3, bishop e6, bishop g5, bishop e7, and white decides to retreat to f4, bishop f4, h6, e3, knight f6, bishop d3. So these are normal developing moves, and as you can see, all the white's minor pieces are already developed. So the minor pieces for the beginners are bishops and knights. And at this point, black decides to move knight to h5, maybe trying to kick the bishop out of the f4 square, or maybe trying to exchange the knight with the bishop, because the bishop is quite strong along that diagonal. But in here, we can see that black has some delay in development. The knight on g8 is not yet, on b8 I mean, is not yet developed. So how did white exploit that underdevelopment? It is by moving queen to b3, threatening to take the pawn on b7. So black decides to push the pawn, so the queen cannot take it. And here, white moves queen to a4 check. So the idea is to force the bishop to go back to d7, and then now white moves queen to c2. So the C file, as you notice, is a semi-open file. A semi-open file is a file wherein you don't have any pawn on your side. In this case, white's pawn is absent on the C file, but there is a pawn on black's side, which is on c7. So this move threatens to do a discovered attack on the c7 square, because at the moment the bishop on f4 is pointing at that square, and also the pawn on d5 is hanging. So there are quite of weaknesses here in black's position. So what did black do here? So he immediately took the bishop on f4 to parry the threat on c7. Okay, so e takes f4, and now bishop to c6, that is to defend the pawn on d5. Castles, castles. Okay, as you can see, in this position, black's knight is still not developed. So how can white exploit that weakness? Okay, let's see. Knight to e5. So black retreated the bishop to b7, and now bishop f5, trying to control the diagonal. And then bishop to d6. As you notice, the knight is outposted on e5, and it is well placed, and it is attacking many important squares, and it is actually preventing black from moving the knight to d7, because there are two minor pieces that are pointing to that square. The knight on e5 and also the bishop on f5. So what's the best move here for white? It is rook to d1. So why is this move important? Because if black is planning to take the knight on e5, so all of a sudden there will be another semi-open file once white captures the bishop, and white will be able to do some counter plays and some tactical plays here. Okay, so let's see how the game progressed. So bishop takes e5, d takes e5, and then black decided to move c6, and this move is a mistake. Okay, so first of all, the rook on d1 is spinning the pawn on d5 against the queen on d8. So that means that the knight can jump to the e4 square, and black cannot take the knight with the d pawn because the white's rook will capture the queen on d8. And now, because black pushed the pawn to c6, the square here, the d6 square here, will be a really good outpost for white's knight. So what's the next move here for black? So he just decided to trade the bishops by moving bishop to c8. And in here, white moves knight to d6, so he can capture the bishop back with the knight. So in here we can see that black is still have an underdeveloped or undeveloped knight on b8. So you see how important it is to develop your pieces early in the game to avoid this from happening. So the key move here that maybe somehow caused this all of this for black is the move knight to h6. So he decided on knight to h5, I mean. So by moving knight to h5 early in the game, so let's see where it happened. So there, so knight h5 there, instead of see knight h5, so instead of developing the knight immediately, he attacked the bishop, and that caused a counterplay for white that led to that position, and the knight wasn't able to develop. So going back to the position we are in earlier, so bishop takes, knight takes, there. So what are the options here for black? He still cannot develop the knight to d7 because of the threat of queen takes e6. You see, once black moves here, and then the queen will take the c6 pawn. So he moved the queen to c7, protecting the c6 pawn, and then he will try to move the knight to d7. But there's a problem here. The problem is the queen is actually pinning the pawn on c6 against the queen on c7. So can you guess the right move here for white? Yes, it is rook takes d5, and at this point black cannot capture back with the pawn because white will just simply capture the queen on c7. So now I think he deliberately did that to just to free the knight from the b8 square. So knight d7, finally, after 22 moves, black was able to develop the knight. But it's a little bit too late because he's now under heavy attack. Okay, rook d6, doubling the attack on the c6 pawn. And here, black made another mistake by moving rook a to c8. Can you see the right move here for white? Yes, it is the fork. Knight e7 check, forking the king and the rook on c8. And then knight takes c8. Okay, so here we can see that white is already winning. So tripling the attack on c6 pawn. So black is forced to push that, and then rook d1, doubling the attack on the knight, and then knight to f8, queen to f5, knight e6. That is another mistake. And after rook to d7, black resigned because of the heavy attack on the 7th rank, and mate is on its way. So did you see how to exploit the underdevelopment of one's position? So in this case, black was not able to develop the knight early in the game, and white was able to exploit that to create some advantage on the center and also in the position in general by using tactics like pin and fork. So the pin is a little bit tricky, and if your eyes are not keen in observing the pin in the game, then you might end up losing, because it is a really good tactic. It is a really good tactic. So make sure that you always pay attention to pin, fork, and all the necessary tactics for you to have advantage over your opponent in every game that you play. So just develop normally. If you are white or black, just develop normally. You can attack later, because that's the problem with some beginners. They tend to attack early in the game. So that's why beginners are usually the ones who play the Scholar's Mate. Scholar's Mate only works for beginners if you are playing against a beginner. But if you are playing against an intermediate player or maybe a high rated player, the 3 moves mate or 4 moves mate won't work on them, because they know enough, you know. So for you to be able to win against or maybe draw against an intermediate player, you need to at least be able to develop your pieces early in the game, castle if you can, and of course it is case to case basis. So I hope you learned something from this analysis, and hope to see you again. Thank you.